We're doing the top 10 teachings of Brachos, Daf Chaf Zayin 27. Some of them are going to relate to Passover. The first one is about a discussion that will be continued on 28 as well about what to do when mincha and musaph come together at the same time, which one of them has to be done first. And but I want to focus on the rationale. Let me look at the Talmud with you. So the Gemara says there's a context here, and it's really understanding what time frame Rabbi Yehuda, when he lays out certain hours for Shachris and Mincha, how to understand. It's a principle of until when he gives that hour, does he mean the beginning or the end of that hour, or the beginning or the end of that time period, like when he says Plaga Mincha. But in that context, the Gemara brings a brisa as a proof text for one of the interpretations. And it says the following: with Tanya, we learned in the brisa, if the individual, and many commentators say it's not talking about a community, but if an individual person it has to decide between one of two prayers, either musaph or mincha, mispal shel mincha v'achar kach shel musaph, the person should pray mincha first, and then musaph. In other words, they have time in this opinion, because Rabbi Yehuda will say you have to do musaph first because you don't have time to do musaph after mincha because it's such a tight window for musaph. The rabbis don't believe in that tight window for musaph. They believe you have plenty of time. You've got all day till evening for both musaph and mincha, and therefore one should do mincha before musaph. What's the rationale? Shazu Tadir v'zu eno Tadira. The reason is because mincha is Tadir. It's a daily occurrence, and musaph is just something we do on shabbos and holidays. So there's a general principle that Tadir v'she'eno Tadir kodem, which means when you have two opportunities for mitzvos that essentially are equal, and one of them comes more regularly, so what comes more regularly precedes that which is coming less regularly. So this has to do with when we're, for example, welcoming holidays that have overlapping things like Shabbos and the holidays. So we'll mention Shabbos before the holiday because Shabbos comes every week. The holiday comes once a year. And there are many other instances where the Talmud invokes this principle of Tadir v'she'eno Tadir, Tadir kodem, that which comes more consistently should come first. It's interesting because sometimes when we're with friends and a friend that we haven't seen in a long time comes along, we're apt to disregard our friends that we're accustomed to seeing and wanting to spend time with a friend that we haven't seen in a long time. If friends were like mitzvot, you'd first spend time with your regular friend because it's almost like disparaging them by right away, like you're accustomed to spending time with them and you are pushing them aside to go be with a new guy, so to speak. So it's an important lesson all around. I'm not saying it applies to social interactions necessarily. There's something to be learned about it nonetheless. I will say that there's a very strong question on this concept of applying Tadir v'she'eno Tadir to what things you should say first, mincha and musaph. The problem is, the question on that is that we just said that tefillot b'makom tmidim tiknum, that we establish the time of prayers based on the time of the offering. And even though there was an opinion that said it was established by the avot, but the patriarchs, even that opinion agrees that it was still really put into place based on the time frame of the offerings, daily and additional musaph offerings. And the obvious question is, musaph is something that would always be brought before the Tamid Shel Bein HaArbayim, before the afternoon daily offering. So why would you invoke a principle of Tadir v'she'eno Tadir that goes against what they actually did in practice in the temple? If, in fact, we're modeling after the karbanot, so stick to the model, and the musaph should always be before mincha, just like the musaph always was before the Tamid Shel Bein HaArbayim in the temple. So it's a strong question. Well, one answer is that we're coming up to Pesach, and as a general principle, the Tamid Shel Bein HaArbayim was the last offering of the day. There is one exception to that, which is the karban pesach. The karban pesach would be brought after the Tamid Shel Bein HaArbayim. So that in theory, we see there is the possibility of having a karban after the Tamid Shel Bein HaArbayim. And even though it was not the musaph that was ever brought after the Tamid Shel Bein HaArbayim, but just the fact that there was another karban brought afterwards would allow you to change the order in theory and daven mincha before musaph. Again, this is according to almost all authorities, talking about an individual, not in a community. So that's one answer. It's a weak answer. I don't like that answer. Another answer, another way of approaching it perhaps, is to understand that there are two elements of what is happening when one does any one of the tefillot. One of the elements is that there is a concept of praising God. And the praise of God has to do with a time of the day, like morning and afternoon, shacharis and mincha, and evening. And it also has to do with additional praise that needs to be offered because of a holiday. And in a sense, even though those seem to mimic and model the offerings that were brought in the morning and the afternoon and the musaph offerings on Shabbos and Yontif, it's not really the same. For example, we know the Talmud says there's a concept of rachamim, which means mercy, that davening has an element of mercy. The idea of a karban has some level of lechaper al nashosechem, atonement, but the atonement is not personal, it's collective. The whole community chips in a tiny fraction of almost nothing to be able to bring all of those offerings, and then you're, so to speak, included in it. Prayer, while there is an important element of Tephila b'tzibur, is essentially a lonely act of communicating with God, which is ultimately about what you need, and spiritually, physically, whether it's about getting something for God, or if you want to understand it on a deeper level, it's about getting God to give you the insight to know what it is that you don't even actually really need, and to accept that and make peace with that. Whichever level of prayer that you're praying, there are many levels in prayer that are not in karbanot. We say they should be. There are levels of karbanot that are not in Tephila, and we say they should be, but they're not. Like you're not schlepping an animal. You could imagine that you're taking your bodily, passion and bringing it into the Tephila, but you're not bringing an animal and having a Kohen splatter its blood on the altar or burn its fat on the altar. So therefore, there are elements of each one that are really separate. And because of that, we don't fully follow the exact time frame of, at the musaph always came before the Tamid Shel Bein HaArbayim, so the musaph always has to be done before mincha. No, we don't say that. Other principles, such as Tadir v'she'eno Tadir, come into play, and that's why the rabbis rule that mincha would come before the musaph when you have to choose which one to do first. Of course, we don't follow that ruling in synagogues. some synagogues try to not make that an issue, so they get to musaph by noon or earlier, because a half hour afternoon, in theory, you could daven mincha and you have this issue. Okay, that's number one. Number two is murderous chickens and the death penalty for animals. Okay, let's take a look at the Gemara. Number two, the Gemara says that there's a brisa. Actually, there's a teaching in Idios. That's a tractate that was considered the bechirta, the choicest kind of rabbinic teachings. And one of the teachings in that section is Al hatarnigol sheniskol beYerushalayim al shaharag es hanefesh. It's an account of a chicken or rooster that killed a child. Rashi said it pecked on the soft part of its head. I guess the baby couldn't defend itself. It was a newborn or presumably very young, and it couldn't just push the chicken away, and it wasn't strong enough. And the chicken attacked this baby and pecked its head till it I guess got through its skull, the soft part of the skull, and killed the child. Now the story goes that they put the rooster on trial. They brought evidence, witnesses, and so on and so forth. I don't have the details in front of me, but it must have been some interesting case to watch. And then the Beis Din ruled that the chicken is a murderer and needs to be stoned to death, needs to be put to death for its murder. The question is, animals don't have free will. Why would you have a capital punishment for an animal? And it's interesting. I heard Rabbi Schachter mention the debate between Maimonides and Nachmanides, where Maimonides says that it's really to punish the owner of the animal. It's the animal doesn't have free will, but we want to send a message that this animal belonging to Joe Schwartz was not under his control. He was negligent, or maybe even worse, and therefore we're sending a strong message by putting the animal to death. The Ramban, Nachmanides, takes issue with this statement of Maimonides and Mar Nevuchim, and says that's not true, because we find that even a shar hamidbar, that means a wild ox that kills someone, is also put to death. So there's no lesson for an owner to be learned, because it's ownerless. And instead, we must say that we do hold animals on some level responsible for murder. Why is that? Possibly it's because in Genesis it says that God says He'll put the fear of humans into animals. So supposedly it's not always the case, but they should fear us. Rabbi Schachter went on to point out that if you tie somebody up and put him in front of a lion and the lion kills the person, you are not technically a murderer. It's a garam. You caused death to occur, but it's not like pulling the trigger of a gun. It was, you were the cause, but you didn't do it directly. But if you tied the person up and they were eaten alive by insects like yetushim, which some people could say are a mosquito or some type of animal that bites people, then if you tied the person up, you are considered the murderer. It's not a garam, it's a direct act as opposed to a cause, because those creatures act with pure instinct, without any will. So it's just almost like water flows, bullet shoots, and these things just bite and sting or whatever it is they do, and they're not put to death. The person who cause their neighbor to be in that situation, force them into that situation, is the murderer. So it's just interesting. Okay, let's continue with number 3, which is bringing Shabbos in early through davening and also kiddush and differing elements of Shabbos. Let's take a look at the Gemara here. The Gemara says, the context of the Gemara is trying to figure out if the law, when it comes to, we establish that the law is like Rabbi Yehuda, that Shachris, you have the first 4 hours of the day, whatever time you start the day. There's a debate between the Magen Avraham and the Vilna Gaon and exactly when daybreak is halachically. So whenever you start the day for these 4 hours, then after those 4 hours, you should be finished Shachris. That was Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. The sages say you have till midday. So we rule in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda, based on something we learned in Idias that part of that story about the animals continued to talk about the Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim, and it was done by the 4th hour. The question now is about mincha. Rabbi Yehuda says you only have till plaga mincha, which the Gemara explains to be the second half of the afternoon. So you have about an hour and a quarter before nightfall or halachic nightfall, which again is debated what we're talking about exactly by nightfall. Do we mean shkia or so on? But you have a hour and a quarter or so before that mincha must be finished by, according to Rabbi Yehuda. And the Chacham say, no, you have all the way till the evening, or at least till Shkia, to daven mincha. And we don't know who the law is like. So we're going to bring a story from a rabbi to try to prove that the law is like Rabbi Yehuda. But then we're going to bring a counter story that would seem to indicate that the law is like the rabbis. And since we have 2 stories that contradict each other, we're going to say either way is good. There is no decisive ruling in this area, which is going to be our what to do with a contradiction, which is going to end up being number 5. But number 3 and 4 are going to be connected to this question. Okay, let's take a look. So the Gemara says, Nechsi Anan, Midirav Matzli Shel Shabbos Be'erev Shabbos Mebod Yom Shema Mina Halacha K'Rabbi Yehuda. Rav, the great sage, and when Rav does something, it's often authoritative. It's often the way we decide halacha, by the practice of Rav. Rav would daven Ma'ariv, the evening service, Friday afternoon, an hour and a quarter before the Shkia, before the Tzeis HaKachavim, not when it was Shabbos, but when it was late Friday afternoon, but it was clearly not Shabbos yet. What do we see from there? That he considered mincha time to have finished. In other words, like Rabbi Yehuda, that says, plaga mincha, you only have till an hour and a quarter before it starts turning into the evening to finish mincha. So now let's take a little deep dive here. Tosfos says that's a good thing, to daven Ma'ariv early and to make kiddush early. The reason being is the Gemara tells us in Nun Beis that Shabbos, I assume, that earlier you bring in Shabbos, the better. That doesn't mean you can bring in Shabbos at 10, 11, 12 o'clock in the morning or noon or 1 or 2 or 3 o'clock, but you can bring in Shabbos from the Plag HaMincha as we're defining the plaga mincha here in terms of this hour and a quarter before either Shkia or some time around then. Great. Now, why is that so good? Because we know the Gemara talks about the mitzvah to be musaph chol min hakodesh. To be musaph, or to add on kedusha into the weekday, to bring in Yom Kippur early, like we learn out of Nisi Misaso Shechem Betisha, right? We learn out that the 9th turning into the 10th, that you begin to fast. There's different ways we learn that out, but most of the Rishonim understand that is also a mitzvah to be musaph on the kedusha, to bring in Shabbos early. The question is, what exactly are you doing by bringing in Shabbos early? There's an Isser Malacha, there's a prohibition against doing Malacha on Shabbos, but there's also various positive elements of Shabbos, such as the Oneg Shabbos, the joy and delight of Shabbos that includes kiddush and hamotzi and the Su'uda Shabbos, which is a delight. Right, v'karasa l'Shabbos oneg. The prophets tell us you should call out a delight of Shabbos. You should enjoy and take pleasure in the Shabbos. So the question is, it's easy enough to take on the restrictions of not doing a malacha, but does that mean that it's actually Shabbos? Can you do the mitzvahs, so to speak, of Shabbos? The same question could be asked about Pesach, which we're going to do for number 4, which is, can you bring in Pesach early to begin the Haggadah and the Arbakosos, or the Achilas Matzah and Maror, before it's actually Tzeit HaKochavim, before nightfall? Okay, so there is a lot to say here. Take a look at the teachings of Rabbi Soloveitchik. Perhaps we can create the following categories. We can say that you can make kiddush for one of 3 reasons on Shabbos. Kiddush is a reminder, a verbal memory of Shabbos, of it being Shabbos and what Shabbos commemorates. Right, Zikaron, L'maaseh Bereshis, it brings us back to God as the creator. It is also Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim. It reminds us that God involves himself in our history, like our exodus from Egypt. And it's also, as we're reading in Parshas Vayakhel, Pekudei, the other parshios that we just read towards the end of Shemos, that it has a connection to the holy creativity of the Mishkan. Because Bezalel knew how to be mitzaref, the otiot, he knew how to combine the words and letters of the Asar Mamarot, the 10 utterances, and to bring it into his creativity. So those are 3 elements off the bat that we're kind of evoking when we make kiddush, either consciously or unconsciously. Now, another thing we understand is that there's 2 types of kedusha. There's kedusha Shabbos and kedusha Yom Tov. They're different. In one aspect, kedusha Yom Tov is Mikadosh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. God sanctifies us to give us the authority to sanctify time through kiddush HaChodesh, through deciding what day is Rosh Chodesh and when to be Ma'aver Hashanah, when to make the year have an extra Adar base. On the other hand, the kedusha of Shabbos is coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mikadshe V'Kaima. Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen explains that although the kedusha of Shabbos, the holiness of Shabbos is coming as a gift and comes automatically, yet there is an element that we can become aware of the kedusha. And us accepting the kedusha of Shabbos is important, because without us, it's like the tree is falling in the forest without anyone to hear it. If the kedusha of Shabbos is there without anyone sanctifying it along with its inner spiritual divine gift of sanctity, what good does it do? So therefore, we have to make kiddush, but the main goal of making kiddush is to realize that the kedusha is above us. But we have to do something to recognize that. That's how Reb Tzadok explains it. Okay. So what we have then is a question of whether the kedusha Shabbos is just the kedusha of the Isser Malacha, the Shvisa, the resting by not doing. That's one type of kiddush, that we're sanctifying this day as being different. Kivo Shavas, Kel Mikol Malachto, that God rested and therefore we rest, we're like God. Our God-like quality is by letting God be God, by us giving him everything by not doing the malacha. That's one way. And so Tosel Shabbos could be simply in the Isser Malacha. And the Kiddush could even be in the Isser Malacha. Or alternatively, like I mentioned, the Kedusha of Shabbos is not just the Kedusha of the Isser Malacha, but there's also positive elements. The remembering of Shabbos is also to be done over a Suda. You need Kiddush b'makom Suda, which means the Kiddush has to be on wine, or challah if you prefer challah and can't drink wine or grape juice, or challah if you don't have wine, at the Suda. Why is it important to be at the Suda? So Rabbi Soloveitchik suggests because we want to combine the sanctity of the proclamation of Kiddush with the wine on the Suda, so that it becomes a combination of things in honoring the Shabbos. Remembering it and honoring it combined together to create its own unity. So in that sense, the question is, and the Rishonim argue about this, you may be able to make Kiddush, because the Gemara says you can make Kiddush even before it's technically Shabbos. It's not Lil, it's not the night of Shabbos, it's Erev Shabbos still. But you can make Kiddush. Why can you make Kiddush? Because you could daven Ma'ariv. Why can you daven Ma'ariv? Presumably because you can follow Rabbi Yehuda if you wanted. You could daven Ma'ariv early, and you could bring in Shabbos early, and you can make Kiddush early. But what can't you do? Some Rishonim say, the Maritats. Actually, no, I don't know if the Maritats is against this whole concept of davening Ma'ariv early on Shabbos, especially if you daven mincha late, usually. Meaning you can't, he says you can't do Tarti de Sasri, and he's against this whole thing, but let's leave that alone for now. But let's just say there's some Rishonim and Poskim that hold that you could make Kiddush, because the Gemara says so, but you can't have the Suda Shabbos. You have to wait a little bit. Okay. Why? So that's because that you could say the Kiddush is bringing the Tosfos Shabbos, but primarily for the Isser Malacha, but not really for the positive elements of Shabbos. And the positive elements of Shabbos need actual Shabbos, not just virtual Shabbos, not just accepting Shabbos early. Okay, so there's a lot more here. If you're really interested, message me and I can maybe see. I gave a much more intricate shiur on this stuff to the yeshiva and let me know, and I might be able to pull it out of Zoom if my son recorded it possibly. Okay, number 4 is bringing Shabbos in early versus bringing Pesach in early when you make kiddush on the 4 cups. And there's a Tosfos, but most notably there's a Rosh. And let me first respond to Daniel that says kiddush needs a Suda, and it does need a Suda. So the answer will be, let's say the kiddush will have to wait a half hour or so, and then the person will have the Suda later. The Rishonim do ask this question, and Rabbi Soloveitchik says that's it's a good question, and therefore many, if not most, told that when you make kiddush Friday night before it's actually Friday night, you can actually begin the Suda as well. But the opinions that say you could do kiddush before the Suda is because you're not allowed to have the Suda. So it's apparent when do you need kiddush b'makom Suda? When you can have a Suda. But since you can't yet have the Suda, it's nikar that the kiddush is for the Suda that will come when you're able to have the Suda in a half hour from then. Okay, I hope Jeffrey Daniel that answers your question. Jeffrey didn't have a question, but I appreciate you anyway. Thank you, Daniel, for the question. So number 4, I was quoting the Rush. The Rush says that all of this is only for a regular Shabbos. You could bring in Shabbos early, you could make Kiddush early, and that's fine. But on Pesach, we have another consideration. It says that you have to bring the Pesach offering on the 14th and eat it on the 15th. And we learn out, the rabbis learn out, that not only does the Pesach offering have to be eaten the night of the 15th, not earlier, not in the afternoon of the 14th or even late in the afternoon. Also, we learn out a hekesh that compares the matzah and the maror to the achila of the karban, and all of those things need to be eaten when it's really lila, when it's really halachically night, not just when you want it to be the beginning of the holiday. You can't make it night when it isn't night for the matzah, the maror, the pesach. And according to the Rush, that's already in Tosos from the Tosos in Pesachim, Daf Tzadik Testament Beis, and Arvei Pesachim in the name of the Harim Korbil. But the Rosh adds in Daled Kosas as well, the 4 cups, which you can't really do the Haggadah without the 4 cups, because the 4 cups of bracket, they begin and end and are all over the place, so to speak, very important elements of the seder. Now the 4 cups, they have verses that we say allude to them, but they're not. The 4 cups are midirabanan. Daniel raised another question. I'm not going to answer that other than say, I guess the answer to that is actually they did eat in Shul when they started making kiddush. They used to have, unlike today, they used to let people stay in shuls on Friday night, and when they made the kiddush, those people would actually, go and wash and eat a little, have a tiny little suda in the shul. And once that practice of letting people stay in shuls stopped, they still retained the practice of making kiddush, even though nobody would eat. And in fact, we are not motzi the congregation with that kiddush because nobody eats. In theory, they could eat. They just don't eat because that's no longer the way. It's just not the what happens anymore. So I hope that answers your question. Daniel, if you keep asking questions, I appreciate it. We might have a very long shiur tonight, which is fine with me until I fall asleep. But number 4, we're finishing up number 4. Okay, we did the rush, and the Shulchan Aruch and all the major poskim like the rush. So it's a little challenging for children to begin the seder that late, but that's basically the custom And as you know, when you were growing up, it was a part of the excitement of the seder was how late you got to stay up. So in a weird way, it makes the night more memorable, even though it doesn't start at 5:30 p.m. for the most part. Okay, that's a little bit. There's so much more there, and there's a lot more there. I just don't have any more time for number 4. We go to number 5, which is this. The Gemara. The Gemara continues and says. Number 5. So the Gemara says, we can't draw conclusive evidence that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda from the story of Rav davening Friday afternoon, because there's another story with other rabbis, Rav Huna, their sages, that they dafka wouldn't daven until it was really night, Friday night. So that would seem to indicate the law is not like Rabbi Yehuda, that the time of mincha goes all the way till shkia, and Mariv begins at seis, something like that approximately. And therefore, they don't follow the law of Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore the Gemara says, "Hashta the lo itmer hilchasa lo kamar v'lo kamar." Since the law is not established, not like Rabbi Yehuda, not like the sages, meaning different people have different practices. The Avid kamar Avid, and Avid kamar Avid. Those who do like Rabbi Yehuda do good, and those who do like the rabbis also do good. There's 3 ways to learn this, probably 101 ways, but let's learn it in 3 ways. The first way is pick a team and stick to your team. Yankees, Mets, it doesn't matter. They're both good. They're just different teams. There's Team Rabbi Yehuda, and that means you have to finish mincha early, and you can start Ma'ariv right afterwards. And that would also mean that you could have no problem starting doing Ma'ariv on Friday late afternoon, Erev Shabbos, after Plaga Mincha, and start Shabbos early and daven Ma'ariv, and maybe even have the Suda, because you could definitely have kiddush. Or the other side, which is, you wait till Tzesa Kochavim, or you wait till it's dark, essentially, to daven Ma'ariv, and you could daven Mincha till Shkia. Okay, and, maybe you could daven Ma'ariv a little early or Mincha a little late if you're in a pinch. You could find some leniencies to how to interpret when Shkia is. Okay, fine, that's another shir. But the point is that you pick one side and you stick to that side. That's what the Mahari Tats learns. That's his shot. Is you can't be in both camps, because they're different camps, and you can't be a Yankee fan and a Mets fan. It's either the Yankee. Now, a lot of people want to be both, but it just doesn't work. Okay, that's one shita, one opinion. A second opinion is no. You could actually, one day you could do like the rabbis and daven mincha really late, and one day you can do like Rabbi Yehuda and daven Ma'ariv really early. And a lot of people do that. They switch and they take both leniencies, but not on the same day. And other people say you can even combine both leniencies even on the same day. The problem with combining the leniencies is it's one of them is wrong. It's a tarti disasri. It's 2 things that if you do the 2 of them combined, that one is right, one is wrong. You're doing something that's creating a contradiction. So the question is, can there be a halachic contradiction that's permitted? Can you live in a paradox? And the answer is that sometimes within a rabbinic thing, the rabbis allow you to be in the paradox. One of the examples is in Hilchos Avelus, in the laws of mourning, we say, Kedivre HaMekel Ba'avel. The law follows the more lenient opinion. Again, when exactly, what's the context of the lenient opinion? Is that with the Tanaim and Amarayim up to a certain point? Not necessarily does that follow the Rishonim and Achronim, that anytime there's a lenient opinion, can you always follow the lenient opinion? But it has some power that's more than just a general principle of when there's a machlokis in a rabbinic law, there's often a principle that when it comes to a suffix derabanan lekula, that doesn't mean that when Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argue that whoever is more lenient when it comes to a rabbinic law is always correct, because we follow Beis Hillel over and above the principle of suffix d'Rabbanan l'kula. But if it's really a suffix, then it would be l'kula. Now, do we sometimes have the concept of two doubts that create a contradiction if you accept both leniencies? The answer is yes. And yet sometimes we say that you can be in that place of the contradiction, and other times we say it's so flagrant that you can't. It's factually incorrect and it's not right. And again, it's all in the details. This is all spelled out. I'm not going to spell it out for you now. We're going to continue with number 6. Distancing in Tephila. This was a topic for a week or two ago. Now nobody comes together at all for a minyan because of the fear of the coronavirus. But 2 weeks ago, people were talking about having a bare bones minyan, 10 people spread out in a shul, everybody 8, 9, 10 feet away from each other. And so believe it or not, interestingly enough, there's certain principles. I remember one time I was talking to this lady, and she said, "You know why I got divorced? Because my husband didn't respect my personal space. He always would come into my kitchen. It was my kitchen, and he would just come in there and take things, and he never respected my personal space." So we have this concept of personal space in Judaism, and one of the ideas of personal space is particularly when you're davening the Shmoneh Esrei, if somebody goes right in front of you while you're davening, it's getting in your space. So there's a law that when somebody's davening, you shouldn't walk in front of them within the Daled Amos, within the 4 cubits. Let's say that's about 6 feet. The problem is, a lot of times, that people will daven in places that they're not supposed to be. For example, they'll daven in, there's a shvil, there's a path, there's the pews or the chairs where everybody's supposed to sit, and sometimes there's not so much room, or people want a distance, even in regular times, and they'll stand outside of the pew and they'll daven in the place where people need to be able to walk back and forth for whatever reason, to go to the bathroom, to get out, to go to escape from a fire. Now there's a principle that ein adam oser davar she'eino shelo. A person can't forbid something that's not theirs. Now, although this is not the laws of Isser v'Heter, or forbidden and permitted, but essentially this person didn't really have the right to stand in this area of the synagogue, which is used as essentially a place to walk back and forth, and therefore you don't have to be so makbid on their distancing, so to speak, if they're doing a long Shmoneh Esrei and you have to get out, you have to leave. You're not stuck there as a prisoner because this guy decided to stand outside of the pew. Okay, that's just a little bit on distancing and davening. Okay, let's go on to number 6. Oh, that is number 6. Number 7. The time I heard of a reform practice, and I thought it was ridiculous, but I was wrong. Okay, many years ago, I heard that a reform synagogue was having a Havdalah service an hour and a half before Shabbos, or 2 hours before Shabbos, and I laughed and I said, "That's ridiculous. You can't make Havdalah, so it's Shabbos is not over. Havdalah marks the end of Shabbos." The truth is, I was technically incorrect. I was ignorant. So now again, it turns out that most halachic authorities do not promote the idea that you can make the Havdalah before Shabbos is over, but the Gemara says you can. So the Reform rabbi may or may not have known this Gemara. So sometimes when you see some other Jews doing something and you laugh at them, you may actually just not know what you're talking about. But at the end, I might have laughed at them out of ignorance, but I might also have been right, as we'll see. Let's look into this. So what is number 7 tell us? Tanya Kavaseder Rabbi Yehoshua. Now the Hilchos Kavaseder Rabbi Yehoshua. Matzah shel matzah Shabbos b'Shabbos. Omer Havdalah ala kos. Omer Havdalah ala kos. Tashema that Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel Misbal Adam shel matzah Shabbos b'Shabbos. Omer Havdalah ala kos. So the Gemara says you can daven the Saturday night prayer while it's still Shabbos. The question only is whether you could also make Havdalah on a cup of wine while it's still Shabbos. And the Gemara answers yes. We learned that you could not only daven for Saturday night on Shabbos, you could even make Havdalah on a cup of wine on Shabbos. Now, of course, it doesn't say this, but of course all the commentaries say it's still Shabbos, but your Yotze, the Havdalah, you won't have to make a second Havdalah. Your Yotze Havdalah through this Havdalah. Your Yotze Ma'ariv through this Ma'ariv. Again, what you really have to understand is there's 3 different things going on here. And we usually combine them all, but there are really 3 things. There's a chiyuv of Ma'ariv. There's an evening chiyuv of Ma'ariv. But again, if we say, for example, that we follow the rule of Rabbi Yehuda, Ma'ariv comes after mincha, and mincha could be required to be finished by plaga mincha an hour and a quarter before nightfall, before Shkia, according to Rabbi Yehuda, or even according to other opinions, Ma'ariv is an extension of mincha. It's when they would burn the parts of the offerings that could have been burnt earlier, but weren't. You could continue to burn them. But in theory, you could burn them earlier, so you don't have to wait necessarily for Ma'ariv for Tzeitzah Kochavim, for nightfall, for 3 stars to come out. So that's one obligation. A second obligation is Havdalah. Is Havdalah when Shabbos is over? Or as the Rambam says about kiddush and Havdalah, it's approximately around the time when Shabbos is coming in or out. But it doesn't have to literally be Shabbos for kiddush. It could be before Shabbos. And it doesn't literally have to be after Shabbos for Havdalah. It could be towards the end of Shabbos. It's recognizing. So for example, there's an old joke that says, what's the difference between Jews and wasps? And it's a joke you tell at a party. You say Jews say goodbye and don't leave, and wasps leave without saying goodbye. Okay, so let's take a look at the Jews say goodbye and don't leave. Why is that? Because they paskin like the Rambam. They say saying goodbye is an idea that it's not that you're taking leave, you're consciously trying to separate yourself mentally to follow through a half hour later with actually leaving. And that would be the same thing. Havdalah is you're saying goodbye, but not leaving. It's still Shabbos. But by making a Havdalah on the coast, you made Havdalah. It's still Shabbos. It's another half hour. And then one Shabbos is out. You still can't do malacha, but you already said your goodbye. You just didn't leave yet. Okay? Anyway, that's one way of understanding it. Now, at the same time, many authorities in Jewish law say don't do this practice. The first thing they said is don't do this practice unless you really need to. It has to be for a good reason. It can't just be because you want to get it out of the way. It has to be for a dvar mitzvah. That's one thing they say. Another thing they eventually said is just be really careful because most people won't understand this. They don't understand this idea of saying goodbye and not leaving. They think you say goodbye, you left. They've got the Protestant model, the WASPy model, and therefore don't make Havdalah when it's still Shabbos. The Talmud allows you to, so that's in theory you could, but in practice don't because people will misunderstand it. So in a sense, the Reform practice that I laughed at, I shouldn't have laughed at it because I was ignorant that it actually has a source in the Gemara, but it's still probably not a good idea because most people think Havdalah means Shabbos is over. So, you have to be careful. So we're both wrong, as long as everyone's wrong. Okay. Number 8. Number 8 is number 8, 9, and 10 are interesting because they're politics or stories. Number 8 is about the breakdown or the war, the breaking point in the war between Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Gamliel. Okay, what's the story here? The story is as follows. Tadir Rabbanan, the rabbis taught a story here. Maisa. B'talmud echad shebal lifnei Rabbi Yehoshua. There was a certain student, and then the next page, he starts out as an anonymous. It's like, what's the whistleblower, unnamed person. He came before Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yehoshua is one of the greatest sages in this. He lived at the very end of the Second Temple period and the beginning of the destruction of the temple, and then the subsequent Roman revolt. It was I don't know exactly when he died, but he was a much older teacher and eventually colleague to Rabbi Akiva and to Rabbi Gamliel and to Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Eliezer Ben Azaria, people that we're going to talk about in the Haggadah. So this student asked Rabbi Yehoshua, Amar Tephila arvis reshus o chava. We had a debate about whether the evening service is reshus, it's optional, you're permitted to do it, or it's obligatory. Amar le reshus. Rabbi Yehoshua said it's optional. That's a simple meaning of it. Tosos has another interpretation of what reshus means. That's not for now. B'lifnei Rabbi Gamliel. This student came before Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi. He was the head of the kind of the Sanhedrin, or the equivalent of. It wasn't exactly really a Sanhedrin at that point, but it was the closest thing to the Sanhedrin. Amar Lai Tefilas Arvis Rishus O Chava. He asked him this question: are you obligated, or is it just you can do the evening service? Amar Lechava. Rabbi Gamliel answered, it's required. Amar Rabbi Yehoshua, Amar Li Rishus. This student said, what are you talking about? Rabbi Yehoshua told me it's optional. Amar Lehamtin Achich Nesubal Trisin Lebeis HaMedrash. Wait till the warriors, which is a way of talking about great sages who engage in fierce debate, enter into the study hall. Kishenich Nesubal Trisin, Amar Hashael V'Shael. When everyone came in, the questioner who asked this question earlier asked again. The same question. Amar Rabbi Gamliel Chava. Rabbi Gamliel responded in front of everyone that it's obligatory. Amar Rabbi Gamliel Achachamim. Klum yesh adam shecholik b'davar zeh. He asked all the sages present, is there one of you that doesn't agree with my opinion? Amar Rabbi Yehoshua lav. Rabbi Yehoshua said no. He lied for the sake of peace. Amar mishmecha amruli. Rishus, but Rabbi Gamliel responded to Rabbi Yehoshua, but they say in your name that it's optional. Amar Yehoshua, Amar al Raglecha v'i'idu b'cha. Rabbi Gamliel told Rabbi Yehoshua to stand up, because somebody was going to testify regarding what he had said, right? So Rabbi Yehoshua stands up, and he doesn't even let the person. The unknown whistleblower come forward, but he says, if I were alive and he were dead, so that I would be a living, I could contradict what you heard in the name of somebody who's dead. Now that I'm alive and he's alive, how can I contradict him? Meaning, I'm not going to deny it. You're right. You got me, Rabbi Gamliel. You got me, Rabbi Gamliel. So Rabbi Gamliel, because he was so upset that somebody disagreed with him, we're going to talk about why he was so upset. Rabbi Gamliel continued to teach that day, and he made Rabbi Yehoshua continue to stand. All the other students were sitting. And it was a punishment. And everybody started getting upset. To the point where there was a mutiny, and they said it's time to depose Rabbi Gamliel, which is going to be number 9, the deposing of Rabbi Gamliel. So the question is, why is this debate such a big deal? So first of all, it's not that this debate is such a big deal. It's that there were 3 important debates, and the most important of them was actually about the calendar, and that was about creating a coherent sense of a calendar. And there was a debate between 1 year about when Rosh Hashanah fell out, and therefore when Rosh Hashanah could be 2 days, but it was going to be an issue on Yom Kippur. So Rabbi Gamliel, the Nasi, said it was 1 date, and he heard that Rabbi Yehoshua didn't agree with him, and Rabbi Yehoshua was going to keep a separate Yom Kippur on his own, and maybe his followers would keep a separate day. So he demanded that Rabbi Yehoshua appear in front of him on the day that Rabbi Yehoshua considered to be Yom Kippur, wearing his purse or wallet and his walking stick and his weekday things to make a public statement that it's not Yom Kippur. And Rabbi Yehoshua did this, and Rabbi Gamliel actually greeted him with kind words and said that you're like my, you're greater than me for listening. But it was considered a humiliation. The reason why Rabbi Gamliel did it is because he felt that if different people would create their own calendars, you can't operate like that. But the fact is, it still was very insulting for Rabbi Yehoshua. And so this is really a major story, and then there was one other story, and then there's this story. So in effect, this story, it's not about whether or not Ma'ariv is required or optional. It's about who gets to make the final statement. Rabbi Gamliel felt, as the Nasi, that at a certain point he gave a ruling, and he felt he had like the koach of the Sanhedrin, that he felt he could rule kind of top down. And Rabbi Yehoshua disagreed. Rabbi Yehoshua felt there needed to be a consensus, and if the consensus wasn't reached, in the meantime, there could be differing opinions as how to do things. So that led to a very stressful situation, and this was the final, in a sense, this is the final straw that broke the camel's back. It's interesting how much it has to do with either the time of a holiday or the requirement of a prayer of a time of the night. So it has to do with authority, and the calendar is the ultimate in authority of setting a calendar, but so is prayer. That's also very important. So that's why this is important, but there's a backstory to it as well. And there's, of course, so much more there. Number 9 is this rabbinic mutiny in replacing the Nasi. They couldn't take it anymore, and they asked Chutzifas, the Meturgaman, to stand. Amri adkama nitzara v'nezel b'Rosh Hashanah ishtakid tzara b'Bechoros b'Maaseh Rabbi Tzadok tzara hachanami tzara. They said, how many times can we allow Rabbi Gamliel to torture, to afflict Rabbi Yehoshua? This is the 3rd time. He already did it with Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the story I told you. He did it as well in a case by Bechoros and here. So Tevanavre, let's go and remove him. Okay. It's not just that they argued in these 3 times. There's all of these 3 times Rabbi Gamliel was almost like kind of abusive to Rabbi Yehoshua. So, first of all, the question is, ultimately, Rabbi Gamliel could have either been an abusive teacher, leader, or arguably he wasn't abusive. He wasn't just trying to grab power, but he was trying to consolidate certain practices so that there could be cohesiveness in the Jewish community. Just to give you what he did accomplish is a generation before him, there was a bloodbath in a debate between the students of Hillel and Shammai. Perhaps he had even, witnessed it or heard about it when he was a young man. The bottom line is that the debates between the students of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel had gotten out of hand. So he felt that his position was to consolidate the power of the Nasi so that he could create a reconciliation, which for the most part meant that he would rule like Hillel, but it would be done in a respectful way so it would get people to be able to have a cohesiveness. Just like he believed you need one calendar, you ultimately need to decide the major halachic issues of the day without them being open-ended and causing ongoing strife. So in that sense, he was very successful, but to be able to do that, it's almost like, we're talking about, the quarantine or isolation for the coronavirus. For something to be very effective, it has to be sometimes done with a heavy hand. And that's why what people are always trading in security and safety for freedom, right? So I'm not sure at what point. I mean, I'm not a doctor or a scientist. I don't really know. I just know it's a very strong question about when are we trading in our own freedom and when are we destroying the economy for a valid health concern, but it's a very good question. So that was the question, really, in a sense, with Rabbi Gamliel, is he's taking away people's freedom of the right to debate, to leave questions in halacha open-ended and have different opinions, and he was trying to remove the debate and make rulings top-down that people would have to acquiesce. Now, sometimes we understand the value of that, because you can't move forward without a halacha in certain circumstances. You certainly can't move forward without a consensus on what day Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is on, right? So we understand Rabbi Gamliel. On the other side, we understand the frustration that the sages felt when they saw Rabbi Yehoshua being mistreated. So that's the conundrum. But once they, there's a thing in Jewish law, when you see something happening 3 times, it's not an exception, it's the rule. So by this point, when 3 times they had seen Rabbi Yehoshua embarrassed in a public way, humiliated, they felt he's whether his intentions are right or not, it's abusive, and they removed him from power. And that gets us to number 10, which is some of the players in the seder that appear in this story also know how to make a power play. The behind the scenes in selecting Rabbi Eliezer Ben Azaria. Let me read to you a tiny bit of the seder, just to bring you up to date with some of these same figures that we're talking about in the Gemara here. The seder says, Ma'aseh Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Eliezer Ben Azaria, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon Shayu Musubim B'Vnei Brak. There's a story with Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer was he's not featured in this Gemara, but he's one of the other people that often argued with Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua in his own story of the Tanur Shal Achnai. But he was there together with Rabbi Yehoshua, who's part of our story, Rabbi Eliezer Ben Azaria and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Eliezer Ben Azaria and Rabbi Akiva also are going to feature prominently in this story. And the next teaching is Amar Rabbi Eliezer Ben Azaria, Hanika Ben Shib Mishen Rabbi Eliezer Chisish Demei Tzis Mitzrayim Baleilos. So these are the people who are quoted, the stories about them in the Haggadah, they're quoted in the Haggadah, and here's what actually happened to them in this tremendous kind of power play. So here's what happens. They wanted to depose him, but they had to put a leader in his place. but the leader was going to have a lot of challenges. So they wanted to make sure they got the right leader. They didn't want it. They didn't. Now, one of the greatest sages would be Rabbi Yehoshua, so they could just replace Rabbi Gamliel with Rabbi Yehoshua. They didn't want to do that because he was part of the machlokas. He was part of the debate. Not every time somebody is in a fight, even if you want to remove one of the people, you can't just replace him with the other person that they were fighting with. Maybe Rabbi Yehoshua had maybe he had too much chutzpah to always challenge the Nasi. You don't reward him for that. We don't want it to be abused, but we don't want to reward him either. So it can't be Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Akiva, we all know, was the greatest of the great, but he was a descendant of converts. Now, we all know that the Torah tells us many, many times not to oppress the convert, not to remind the convert that they are a convert. And it's really about power. The convert doesn't necessarily have a powerful family to protect them. And we really ultimately have to be the stand-in for the family. We have to make them our family and not abuse people because they may not have a power base of, other people that are blood relatives to look after them. So Rabbi Akiva didn't have, his power was his knowledge, but he didn't have a family to back him up, so to speak. Now, there's two ways a family backs you up. One way is actual power, and one way is yichus. Rabbi Eliezer Ben Azaria came from a wealthy, a powerful family, a wealthy family, a family of priests, a family that was esteemed. So he had both, the Gemara says, the ability to talk to royalty because he had money and power and lineage. So therefore, if people would try to undermine him, he had all of these abilities to combat it with who he was, who he knew, who knew him, the esteem that he was held in. Even spiritually, if Rabbi Gamliel would try to put like a spiritual hex on him, his chut avot, the merit of his forebears, would protect him. So there's another more cynical view here, is that they actually wanted Rabbi Gamliel to do tshuva, which we're going to talk, they wanted him to change his way. If they would have put somebody like Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Yehoshua, there would never be any way back for Rabbi Gamliel to ever take any power back. So they put a youngster, Rabbi Eliezer Ben Azaria, very, very good in many ways, but still only 18 years old or 17 years old. So that way, if they felt Rabbi Gamliel would improve, they could put him back in power. That's a little bit about the top 10 teachings of the Daf for Chav Zayin. Thank you so much for watching.